All right, so we're back. Um, the other thing I find, just to, again, for the transparency side of everything, the extensions that they make are really hard plastic. If you use like a cutoff saw or something along those lines, something with a grit end, like you would use like a metal cutoff wheel or something along those lines. The only downside with it is if you go to cut some graphite or something like that afterwards, the metal, the plastic itself will burn itself into the edge of the cutting wheel and will make the next thing you try to go through, unless it's steel, very difficult, and it can kind of burn through like a graphite shaft or something like that, and it just makes the whole process a little bit more difficult. You can heat it up a lot, and that's not really worth it. It's meant to cut, it's not meant to burn through something. All right. So what I just choose to cut it off is just a plain old hacksaw. So again, we made our mark, which would be about approximately a 16th or an eighth of an inch below the 38.5 inch mark, which is what we're talking about. Because if we were to cut one of these open, I wonder if I have one here. Nope. Cut a grip off the butt cap itself, the rubber will sort of end about there. So once you install it on the shaft itself, and with that little extra eighth of an inch or so, it'll be finished right at about 38.5 inches. Which actually, for a second before I do this, let's talk about that for a moment, because there are some companies that will publish standards that are a little confusing to some people. There's two published standards that I see across the board, and generally that's with the grip on and with the grip off. Mizuno is one company that chooses to generally, I think they've just recently changed that, but they used to publish a length of a golf club, what they call the trimmed length. So the trimmed length is actually trimmed with the shaft, with the grip not on, just the length of the shaft to whatever it was. And I think it was generally somewhere in the neighborhood of about a quarter of an inch shorter than a lot of the other companies. And there was a lot of conjecture as to why. No, that's simply just put that they didn't really take the grip into account when they were trimming the shaft length. The other one is a finished length, like Titleist uses a finished length. So with the finished length, that means with the grip on, the club will measure out at 38 inches. We're not talking about a lot of length. We're talking in some cases, an eighth of an inch, generally not much more than a quarter. I'm just not a big fan of long golf clubs myself. I think a quarter of an inch, depending on what you're doing, that's just further into the turf for most people. And if you hit it before the ball, then that's a quarter of an inch deeper into the turf that could make it difficult, or you'll hit it high up off of the face. So, just be careful, or should I say, that's not even be careful, know what you're getting. All right, because again, there's no right and wrong with longer or shorter golf clubs. It's just a matter of, is it going to help you or it isn't. And if you're choosing to do this for yourself or friends or something along those lines, what I would choose to do would be understand the way that the companies do it, which would be either a trimmed length or a finished length, and then just make each one of those brands that you ever choose to, if you ever choose to do this for yourself or other people or something along those lines, I would follow their rule as opposed to anything else. So now with Titleist, they're a finished length company. So we'll go back after I trim this off, and you'll see that it should come out just that fast. It should come out right about an eighth of an inch below 38.5 inches. I'll just pause again and bring it back out on my bench rule back out, and show you, okay? I pre-set up my bench rule here so that, again, you didn't have to be bored with the details of keeping the score lines parallel. And you can see right there that we're right in between that 38 and 38.5. So again, once we put that grip on, it'll finish right out at 38.5 inches. The other thing that you'll notice with this is there's a little bit of fray on the back end of it. And basically all I'm gonna do is just take a regular old utility blade. You can see how much use that gets. And basically just, knock all that off so that when I put the grip on, I won't have to deal with any edges or anything like that with tape and sliding the grip on. Okay, so now everything's cut. So now I want to take an extra second because we skipped some details. Unfortunately, I spared you big time. Let's talk about epoxies to put these things together. So here is the epoxy that I used on these particular clubs. It's an old Golfsmith 2-part epoxy. That's an 18 to 24 hour cure time. So what that basically means is a lot of times when you see epoxy, I think I have another one here. You'll see two different things. You can't quite read it out, but make it out. But right there, it'll say 30, 60. What that means is that first number is what they call set time. So that'll be when the epoxy won't be able to work with it anymore. It'll start to harden up, or what they call gel. And once it starts to gel, there's no going back. You can't. It's wasted after that point. If you haven't used it, or you still have clubs that weren't finished, then you just need to make another batch of whatever epoxy you're using to be able to keep going, because if not, it's just not going to work. So again, this one here is an 18 to 24 hour epoxy. And why I say such a range, it has a lot to do with the temperatures that you're using. The warmer the temperature, the faster the cure time. This happens to be my sunroom that's off the back of my house, so it's not as temperate as the inside of my house, or even what my garage would be. So this in the daytime is going to be much warmer, but in the nighttime it's cooler. So I set this last night, and the temperature was probably high 40s, 50. So setting it in that, it's just going to take a little bit longer. So it'll probably be more towards what I do that at about 8 o'clock last night. So somewhere towards 6, 7 o'clock this evening, 8 o'clock this evening, it should probably be at full cure. And then it'll probably work out fine. And you can always tell. I always got into the habit of putting it, on a piece of tape or something that, you can take off and then check it. You can leave it with the job that you did. Come back and check and see whether or not, stick a fingernail or something on it and see whether or not that's curing, because you can see my fingernail actually made a slight impression in there, so that means that it's not cured yet. I can safely do what I'm doing here, but I certainly wouldn't go out and play with it. So again, obviously not enough cure time. So again, you're gonna just have to leave it be, and eventually it'll get to a full cure. But you're gonna be closer to 24 hours. The other thing I have a tendency to use is something called shafting beads. This is basically like an inert product that you put into the epoxy. It's almost like ground up. I don't know whether it's glass or whether it's plastic or something like that, but it's like a powder. So basically, if the shaft was to have any wiggle, it'll tighten up that fit, and it'll keep the shaft nice and straight, so that you don't have to worry about it leaning over and such. All right, the next thing I was going to say, since we're in the finishing side, I got two things to go. Obviously, we have to put the grip on, and then we have to buff and polish the ferrules. Sometimes you can get some OEM ferrules that match really well when you're talking about how far it sticks out. But these were just some ones that I had, and again, we wanted with this set, remember these heads were on the lighter side, so I wanted to increase some mass, so to help aid that situation without having to put any other additional weight or tungsten powder or anything in it. I chose a larger ferrule to increase the heft on this end, as well as by the little extension, we might be somewhere in the neighborhood of about D0 to D1 by the time we put this grip on, which brings up another point. Let's talk about that swing weight, right? So there's easy ways to be able to adjust it. With an iron, about 2 to 2.5 grams of mass, depending a lot on the weight of the shaft itself, will increase an iron by approximately 1 swing weight point. If you're using lead tape, for the 1/2 inch wide lead tape, every 1 inch is about 1 gram, so it would be about 2.5 inches of lead tape in order to increase by 1 swing weight point. If you're doing it on a driver, it's a little bit different because of the fact that it's amplified in length. It'll require a little less mass in order to make that head be influenced by that weight. So it might only be 1 gram, 1.5 grams to increase by 1 swing weight point. And obviously the longer it would go from there, the more accentuated the length of the golf club, anything above 45 inches, then it would be easier to be able to make it heavier or lighter. Hence the reason why with a lot of drivers, you're not dealing with 10 grams here, 10 grams there. It's only a few grams, okay, to have a fairly large influence and feel. So anyway, so what I'm going to do to, sorry about that sidebar. What I'm going to show you what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out my my belt sander, and we're going to use a felt belt to be able to buff and polish this out, and you'll see that it'll come out as a nice shiny finish like it is again, but now we'll lose this little, that you can see there, that little extra hanging edge. Again, this is nothing to do with performance at all. The ferrule itself on any golf club is strictly decorative. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, some of the manufacturers don't really actually put any epoxy underneath the ferrules. So sometimes when the weather gets hot, sorry for my cat in the background, it will expand. The plastic will expand. So if it was a tighter fit, it might push itself out of the ferrule, out of the head itself, and you might see a small gap. Just don't worry. The gap doesn't do anything. It's not going to change anything. These things are strictly decorative. So again, you can disassemble it and reassemble it if you want to. Sometimes you can push the ferrule down and put a little, any sort of a glue on it if you can get it pushed down, but it's not going to affect how much of, whether the golf club is loose. In some cases it is, but that's a different story. If you feel like it is, then bring it down to a local shop and have them inspected for you, and that would be the way to do that, if you feel unsafe, of course. But anyway, we're going to buff that ferrule down, and this way you can see what that process looks like. Okay, so this is the part, like I said, we're gonna have to buff and polish this, right? So I have out my belt sander. This is a felt belt. Just a quick peek at my little setup here, and you'll see that I made this years ago, this little cradle to be able to hold the iron in place, so that when I buff and polish and do everything, that it's all nice and good. The other thing that you can never emphasize enough is the importance of safety and such. You can see I'm wearing my glasses. I know it's only plastic, but I would contemplate gloves, but I've done this enough that it's not spinning fast enough where I would like lose a limb. I might get an abrasion or something like that at most, but I haven't gotten one of those ever, so I feel pretty confident in that. I'm going to turn this on. Unfortunately, you're going to have to hear the noise coming from the belt, but then we'll see what happens. You can get to at least see the process, then I'll turn it off, finish, and then show you how the rest of it goes, okay?